I have to ask you about your banking sector because it's been very much in the news. Swedbank and allegations of really what seems like very serious money laundering that basically went on for many, many years. In your view, given what we know and the fact that investigations are still ongoing, what went wrong here?
Well, we don't know yet, but of course the government, we're very concerned. Now, of course, it has to be investigated, and the bank needs to fully cooperate with the authorities that are the ones who will investigate this. And, of course, we want to know what has happened.
And when you look at the bank in particular this week, there's been a strong market reaction. The share price fell. There are concerns that maybe we may see more allegations. Do you worry that at any time this becomes more of a systemic risk?
We will see what will happen during the next weeks and if there will be even more reason for concern. But, of course, from the government side, we follow this development very closely, and also our authority is very much involved in cooperating with the Baltic authorities.
And one of the criticisms we've heard this week is that you have a big market like the single market where you have 28 different countries that do business with each other, but there isn't really that cross-European supervision, or it's not as maybe as strict or as efficient, I would say, as it should be. Do you agree with that? Do you see need for more cooperation, of actually more roles to create that pan-European almost watchdog police?
I definitely think we need to cooperate more, and right now the Swedish authorities cooperating with their Baltic counterparts, but definitely we need more cooperation. Then we need to discuss, and I think the Minister of Finances also will discuss, should it be more centralized or should it only be more cooperation? And there are pros and cons. I mean, a pro with centralization, of course, it would be more equal across Europe. On the other hand, the very important cooperation, we now have the national authorities with the national police would then be, and other local authorities would then be broken if we'd have a more centralized supervision. And I think the balance, where we strike the right balance there, is something that we need to discuss among the ministers of finance in Europe.
And what I hear is for the banks in particular, they do say it's very tricky because it may involve countries kind of opening up their books and saying, well, this is what we have and this is what we found. Banks will tell you, well, it may expose us to competition in other countries and we may not want to reveal all that type of information. Do you agree with this? Is this maybe a concern where you think it may become a problem for banks because it's not kind of a level playing field if we reveal things, but they don't to us?
Of course, we need to have a level playing field, and I think this is an area where it makes sense to have lots of regulation that is pan-European. Then, of course, we need to also see that we use the regulation in a way that makes it a level playing field for all financial institutions in Europe. And of course, the different authorities in different countries handle the regulation differently. This is something we need to discuss among ministers of finance then.
And just to finish this up, and it's not just about Sweden, there's been allegations in other countries, which bring me to this question. There is a trend, there is a pattern here. If these were Russian clients, it was a lot of money and it happened in specific countries over a very long period of time. Would you say at this point, would it be okay, or would it be I guess, politically correct to just say we're going to ban all transactions with Russian clients because we really don't know what's in this money?
I think that would be... No one has raised that question to me before. It sounds very drastic. I think I will pass on the issue. At the same time, I think it's also important for the Baltic states. It's important for the Baltic states' development that they do have a chance to have a functioning financial sector. And, of course, it's also important that the banks that are active in the Baltic states really take their responsibility to know which clients do they have and what are their real background. And that's also important not only for the banks but also for the Baltic states, because they need a well-functioning financial sector.
And if we look at the macro picture for the Swedish economy, when you look at the krona, I know it's not really up to you to see how this trades or whether to say it's too low or too high, but it does seem that the market has priced in, well, a lot of bad news, and maybe it's too pessimistic on the outlook for the economy, and that's reflected in the currency. Are they too pessimistic?
Well, I don't know what's in the mind of the market, but what I see, of course, we have had extremely high growth in Sweden for the last years, and of course we are going into more normal growth rates the coming years. At the same time, we continuously see a very, very strong development on the labor market, where labor supply has, I think, surprised everyone, and the employment rate in Sweden is the highest of all European countries. And we have very strong public finances and very low public debt. But of course, I mean, we also have things that we have to work with. Big problem for Swedish business and industry at the moment is lack of competence. Since the labor market is so strong, it's difficult to hire the competence you're looking and seeking for, and there's also a shortage of housing. So of course we do have to do our homework as politicians as well.
And when I look at your economic forecast and that of the Riksbank, there is a little bit of a divergence, a little bit of difference. Where do you think that comes from?
Between?
Your central bank and your own forecasts.
Last time I did a forecast was in October. So I'm coming with a new forecast within the next month. So it will, of course, then we will take in the developments and that has been during the last months.
So we'll see when you we'll get to that bridge when we. And I also want to ask you, just on a more global theme, you do see that there are concerns about global slowdown. There are concerns about, well, external trade. You look at central banks, they were supposed to tighten. Now you do see more stimulus. Your central bank has said we're going to continue to normalize. I guess for you, or you prepare for both scenarios, one in which you do continue to see a very strong and very tight labor market, tighter monetary policy, or maybe one in which kind of you have to take a step back and risks become more pronounced?
Well, I mean, what I see when I look across the world, I mean, I see very big risks. Definitely, if you look at the risk picture, it's definitely more on the downside when it comes to global trade, which is very important for Sweden, where, I mean, we're a small export-oriented economy. Looking at Europe with Brexit would, of course, affect Great Britain more than other countries, but Sweden is one of the European countries that you have a lot of trade with Great Britain. I also see, when I look at Europe, I see countries that still have very high debts and very high debts in the public finances. So I mean, the risk picture is definitely on the downside, and we have to be prepared for that kind of potential development. And we have prepared ourselves with having strong public finances and very low public debt. That's the way you prepare for all potential scenarios.
So it's a very good fiscal picture when you look at the public finances. But if you had to maybe inject a little bit more stimulus into this economy, would you consider any kind of, just open stimulus, like in the way of tax breaks?
Normally in Sweden, when I mean, these are hypothetical questions. So I mean, but historically in Sweden, if there is a downturn, we often try to stimulate the public sector, so the welfare sector, schools, daycare centers, hospitals, elderly care.
So that's more infrastructure spending than anything else.
Well, infrastructure spending is, I think, we have learned difficult because the planning horizon on infrastructure is rather long. So trying to stimulate that, I think, has historically proven to. The stimulus comes when the economy has turned upwards again, whereas stimulating the public sector so they don't need to lay off teachers or nurses because of a slowdown in the economy. It's from the Swedish experience a good way of stimulating the economy.
And when you look at, European politics now, but in particular Brexit, obviously this is an ongoing question, and we have 20 days until Brexit Day. I guess the big question, and it's difficult to put an answer to that one, but when we get to March 29, what do you see? Do you see a deal? Do you see an extension? Another referendum? How do you prep for any of this? Because all scenarios are open.
All scenarios are open, and we need to prepare for all scenarios. And this is also what the government is trying to signal to the Swedish business and industry, particularly the small companies, that you have to prepare for the worst case scenario. I really hope that we won't end up in a hard Brexit, but that we can have either an extension or a deal. That would be so much better for not only Europe, but also for Great Britain and for the long-term relations within Europe. And also, of course, we are following very closely the development in Great Britain, and also the political development. And I think the this will be a dividing moment in history, and how the politicians act in this moment, I think, will be studied very carefully in the future.
And just to pick up on that, next week there will be what could be another crucial vote. What would you say to MPs who will vote on this deal? And the extension, I know, is very much an option now. In your view, what's best, to get a short extension that maybe focuses minds, or a long extension, given that it's been 2 years and there's been very little progress?
Well, it's not up to me how your parliamentarians decide to vote, but I can say something. A hard Brexit would be, everything is better than a hard Brexit.
And how do you tell your companies and your own sectors in Sweden? Because we've often heard, particularly from Brussels, that they'll say we can't do the homework. Every country needs to be aware that they need to do their own thing, and every country is different, and you need to implement it. We can give you guidelines, but not exactly word for word, this is what you should do. How have you prepped for that in Sweden?
Yes, we have our authorities, our customs authority, for instance, have tried to give information to all companies how they can prepare when there's, when there's no customs union anymore. There's a lots of certificates that you need, how companies can prepare so they are prepared right after, if there would be a hard Brexit, and also in other areas we have tried to really be as prepared as possible also for the worst case scenario.
And just as a very final question, today's International Women's Day. The obvious question in 2019 is, should everyone be a feminist?
Of course. Of course. And as a Minister of Finance, how can any Minister of Finance not be a feminist? I mean, just looking out at the world, I often say that it's difficult to argue any different that intelligence and innovative ideas is probably distributed equally between boys and girls and men and women. And looking at the world right now, when there are so many women that are not part of the labor market, that are hindered from making careers, developing their ideas, there is so much potential in our economy that stays underused. So the world GDP and the growth could be so much better if we would have a gender equal society. And from being a Minister of Finance, there's a lot of GDP potential, and there's a lot of potential for tax incomes as well there.
So I take it that's a yes, a very clear yes.